Hi, everybody. Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady. Thanks for joining me today on this exciting topic. Let's get started.
Hi, and thanks for joining me for our session that will cover HR metrics that matter. There's a famous saying by Peter Drucker, and it goes, "What gets measured gets improved." Well, I've added on to that. What gets measured gets the attention and focus of the C-suite, and that is what we need. So today's expectations, we are going to gain an understanding of key HR metrics, and there's going to be a lot, so be prepared to take notes. Be able to identify and assess the strategic and operational impact of HR metrics. Learn the role of metrics in measuring and communicating value. Review the basics of using HR metrics in assessing human capital related risks. And learn how HR metrics improve strategic and operational decision making. So before we get into the metrics, I really want to talk about the bridge, the business gap bridge, and in moving HR from compliance to leadership. Are we going to do that all today? Absolutely not. But really think about this as you're going through the course and considering what kind of metrics you could start implementing at your organization, what kind of metrics you should implement at your organization. As we all know, HR is very, very heavy on compliance, and often we get stuck there because we don't have the tools and resources to change our roles from compliance to something else. Why do we need compliance? We need to follow the law, and in the United States, we have a lot of laws and different laws depending on the state, even down to the county or city. And of course, based on the size of your organization, we obviously want to stay out of court, but we really want to start using this data that we gather in all this compliance. We want to use it as a resource or measurements from recruiting of awesome new hires to retirement and exit of staff. And then it would be ideal to be able to bridge the business gap and turn HR and the data that we have and we're not using into leadership skills and leadership abilities. We, HR, should be assisting managers with engaging, motivating, holding accountable, rewarding, retention, or exit of employees. We want to make sure that we, HR, aren't doing this, that the managers are doing this, and that we should all be working towards the common mission or alignment of values. So let's dive in to metrics. Metrics should be used to assist your people strategy. This is a great image here. It shows that HR professionals who share reports more often also tend to believe that their reports have a high impact on strategic management. And so you can see that if you're only doing a report once a year or even once a quarter, that the people that are supposed to be looking at these reports, they don't really think it's serious. So when you're considering using reports, really consider using them on a regular basis. And by a regular basis, I mean weekly. And if you can't do it weekly, try bi-weekly or at a minimum monthly. So our first goal today is gain an understanding of HR metrics. Every single part of the employee life cycle should be tracked and then measured. First, it needs to be tracked, and that's kind of where we're stuck. We do have a lot of data, but we don't always put it together. So everything from hiring and referrals, training and retention, motivating and engaging your employees, or creating programs to help your managers do that, holding people accountable for the job that they're supposed to be doing, and their behaviors in that job as well, all the way through exit. Hopefully it'll be retirement and not getting terminated. So here's a sample HR metric. And this is a time to hire or a time to fill. And they're actually two different things. So we're just going to address them as one for right now. So these are the items that you need to be considering if you're going to be doing a time to hire. It's from the point that the hiring manager says, help, I need somebody. Either somebody left or we're growing, whatever it is. So the moment they raise their hand and say help, all the way through the person shows up for work the day one and they've completed their paperwork and they're ready to rock and roll and start working and being productive. So HR manager, a hiring manager submits their job opening. Someone in your organization, it's different for everybody, approves it. Recruiter, if you have recruiters, start advertising for it. They also start rejecting candidates that aren't qualified and start talking to people that says, hey, I need more information. This could be via email, it could be via an online system, phone, or even in person. And then you make an offer. Hopefully they accept, right? If they accept right away, then you start the rest of the process. If they don't, you got to kind of go back and find another candidate and make that offer. And that sometimes drags down this process. Background checks, drug screenings are usually pretty standard. And then preparation for arrival and new hire paperwork. We need to be prepared for this. And if at all possible, if we're able to get a lot of that done before they even start, then their first day will be awesome because they can get right to work. Because nobody wants the first day to be, drowning in paperwork and they didn't even get to meet their team. This is a great resource here, and I put the links throughout this course today. I put links in there so you can go back on your own time and check out the articles or where I got the information from. If you need to reduce the timeline of, your new hire timeline, time to hire, time to fill, backtrack your steps and see where the kink is. You could usually figure it out. Unfortunately, sometimes there's not a candidate available, and so you have to keep opening up your pool. But you should be checking this, pretty regularly. So we'll just look at the construction industry here. So this was a workable survey. And they're saying that the mean vacancy duration, so the average time to hire in construction is 12.7 days. Well, if it's taken you longer, why is that? Maybe your job ad isn't specific. Maybe you're not offering enough money, whatever it might be. If you go to the link at the bottom of this page, there is a lot more industries that are covered in this. So check it out and see if, you're in there and start calculating what your time to hire is. Another sample HR metric is training and retention. So I find that what is scheduled happens versus, we've got to do that someday. Put it on a schedule, make it happen. And if you put it on a schedule for new hires for their first week, first 2 weeks, first 90 days, first year, whatever the position might require, then you can actually start measuring that too because it's scheduled and people become accustomed to that. This is part of the employment process. And by people, I mean managers and supervisors who tend to yank employees off of training because they're busy. So some training metrics. So here's an example. You can measure the job impact and the time it takes before the impact is seen. For example, now you're doing a training on a new process or a new procedure. If you were measuring how many errors there were before the training and then how many errors there were after the training, there's your metrics right there. Another option is change in strategic results from training. Example, you measured before the trainings, the customer satisfaction scores, and then after, has it increased? I would hope so. If not, then your training's ineffective. Another example is the impact on the business goal. For example, if there was a lot of loss in your organization, product waste, materials being cut too much and you had to throw them away. And now you did training on how to do proper cutting of materials and now there's less loss. Well, that's going to impact your bottom line. And then another example is correlating your training to changes in profit. This is called return on investment. For example, you conduct a training, whatever it might be, and now there is an increase in profit or a reduction in expense, such as overtime costs. So now you have measurements. The key here is, though, You have to start the measurements at some point before the training and then after. Otherwise, you're not going to have an apple to apple comparison. If you don't freak out. Don't worry. You're just going to have to use your best judgment, probably get with finance and get some of their information as well, so that you can do a generic assessment before and after. So here's a sample HR metric on motivation and engagement. So you see my little smiley face there. Employee engagement is so much more than satisfaction. So you can do a satisfaction score all you want, and you could have employees that are so happy, but they're unproductive. And they might actually be making other individuals unproductive. So focus less on satisfaction to start with and more on engagement. Fully engaged employees basically means I know where we are going as a company, as a department, as a location, and I'm given 100% to help get us there. Oh, and by the way, I have no intention of slowing down or leaving. Employee engagement is an outcome that depends on the actions of the organization, so on leadership, directors, management, and the people in the teams. Employee engagement does not come from the employee. It comes from everyone else. So again, leaders, managers, supervisors, directors. Don't blame the employee if they're not engaged. Here's a little bit more information on the top 5 drivers of employee engagement. And again, the information of where I've gotten this is at the bottom of the screen. Find one of these. If you're starting from scratch, just pick one and stick with it. Measure one. I have confidence in the leaders of this company. And then ask that question to everybody. And then you could possibly find out, okay, well, what department's not happy? What I find is people get confused by the word leaders. And so make sure you clarify specifically what leaders mean, if there's certain titles that mean leaders versus managers or supervisors. And then ask yourself, as you're continuing to do this over time, what changed and why did it change? Be careful with assumptions. Generally speaking, the more engaged workers you have, the better your bottom line is. Or is it? Interesting enough, low performers are significantly more likely to recommend the company as a great place to work. Well, I don't do much around here, but it sure is a great place to work. Leadership IQ, a leading research firm, has discovered that in 42% of organizations, low performers are actually more engaged than high and middle performers. So what that really means is that the high performers are self-motivated, but they may not be happy personally. And so that means you need to talk to them. Another sample HR metric is accountability. Does every role have SMART goals? This is where you can start. Help managers set this up as a pilot project. I love pilot projects because if it doesn't work, you could yank it and put it away. But make sure that your goals are specific, measurable, achievable, results-oriented, and time-bound. I find that we often do the SART and we forget the M, which is the measurement parts, the metrics. And this is another example of an HR metric with accountability. So be very, very specific. You could say to the employee, okay, to do this task, it should take 31 minutes, not about 30. Oh, 15 is fine, 45 is fine. And if they're not meeting that, then find out why. Is it the employee that's the problem? Is it the manager? Is it the product or the service? Make sure you find out why. Another metric, unfortunately, is exits, and we all have to deal with these. What I want to know is, especially if it's a voluntary exit, is there a common denominator? Is it the department? Is it the pay? Is it poor performance or behavior? And then maybe it wasn't voluntary. Were they maybe not a good fit? Okay, so let's even go backwards even more. If they weren't a good fit, why were they in that role? Who hired them? Who promoted them? Who put them in that role? And so again, making sure that you're going backwards and finding a connection. So what's the common denominator? It is often the manager, right? Don't rush to place blame, though. However, I would ask these questions. Who hired them? Who trained them? Who promoted them? Who held the manager accountable? 58% of new managers receive no training. I don't think this shocks anybody on this call today, but 58% no training. So it's really hard to hold a manager accountable for hiring staff or training staff when they haven't been trained to do it. Is the manager given unattainable goals or deadlines? Does the manager have enough budget to hire the right people? Often we all know the answer to this, so don't go blaming the manager, but they usually are the common denominator. Moving into the second section of this training today, be able to identify and assess the strategic and operational impact of HR metrics. We all love big data. You do have to be careful with data because the data itself can be broken, and so be very, very careful on how you use it. I always make sure that I get somebody else to check my data as well. But the things that you really want to concentrate on for using data is growth and expansion. Unfortunately, this year of 2020 could be reduction of force, or it could just be cutting costs as well. HR metrics are wanted, believe it or not, by the executives. This is a survey from Bamboo HR. And in this survey, HR and executives were both asked if they would like a solid data-driven people management strategy. And they said yes. 67% of both the HR and executives who participated said it is very important to them. The key, though, is, again, making sure that the data is correct. Because if you're pulling reports to use for metrics to measure on success and the data is wrong, then the executives are not going to trust you. So making sure the data is correct. And many of us HR professionals, we're not data experts. So that's where you want to get a data expert involved, and perhaps somebody from the IT department, or if you have a data department, or even an outsourced consultant who can help you and can really dive into your database and say this information is outdated or inaccurate, or you're missing this or that. But it's very, very key, because if anybody knows, you show one wrong report to the executives, and some of them may hold it against you forever. So here's an example if you're considering expanding. So if you want to expand, you may need to pull metrics on the market research on talent in your area, say, including transportation. Are there bus lines to my factory? There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Most of this information is out there somewhere. Most of it our taxpayers have already paid for. So just ask your friends for help. Feel free to reach out to me at any time via LinkedIn, and I will try my best to help you find a resource. An example right here is Career One Stop Business Center. This is from the Department of Labor. And when you go on there, there's all these tools, and you narrow it down to your zip code. And so you could use metrics that somebody else has developed already to say, you know what, I don't think this is a good idea to have this role in our organization, or to open up a location in this zip code because there's no buses or whatever it might be, or the talent might not be available. So hopefully that makes sense. We mentioned briefly about reduction in force. Unfortunately, you're going to have to use data, internal data now as well, and make a decision on how are we going to reduce reduction in force. How are we going to reduce the workforce? Last in, first out, poor performance behavior, highest paid, other. No right, wrong, or different. However, I have to say that I lean towards getting rid of the poor performers and behaviors. First of all, they shouldn't have been there at all. But we'll fix that bridge as we're moving forward, right? But if you can get rid of them first, the problem is you have to make sure that it's been documented. If it hasn't been documented, then you're going to have to use other sources, because it could then get into discrimination, age discrimination, race, gender, whatever it might be. So just be careful when you're doing this as well. But, you'll be able to, if you have an HRIS system, even if it's just a simple system like a payroll system, you should be able to export data and use a lot of that data to make decisions about layoffs, reductions in force, whether they're temporary or long term. And, this is something that executives want to see all the time. So not just during a worldwide pandemic, but cutting costs. You can possibly cut excess recruiting costs as headhunters, external recruiters, ineffective or outdated training programs, or benefits that seem really nice for, the executives, but most of your people do not want or need, and would rather you spend that money somewhere else that would actually help them. So cost cutting is probably something that goes on all the time. Again, I caution jumping to conclusions on any of these, because even the first one about recruitment costs, if you don't have an internal recruiter and there's hard to fill positions, you kind of need to outsource this or hire a recruiter, which might be way too expensive for you long term. So be careful when you're cutting costs. Make sure that it makes sense. And the only way you're going to do that is to compare apples to oranges to peaches to everything else and say, okay, this is the best decision. The third section of today is to learn the role of metrics in measuring and communicating value. This is especially important when asking for changes. So when you're saying, hi, I would like some money. I'm the HR department and I want more money, right? Everything we do, we want more money. We need more money. Not that we want it. We need more money to bring a tool in to improve our employees' experience. These are the questions that you should expect instead of, oh, this is what the employees want. How does X, whatever they want, affect the company's bottom line? So how does installing a soda machine affect the company's bottom line? Will it reduce expenses? Probably not, unless you were giving away free soda. Will it improve productivity? It might, if they had to leave to go to the local gas station or 7-Eleven to buy a soda. Or let's go on another tangent here. Maybe you don't have refrigerators in the workplace. Well, now if you now bring in a couple of refrigerators to put in your break room or in a common area, people could possibly store sodas in there. Not excess. You'd have to create rules. We know how that all goes. Will bringing in whatever increase sales or revenue? If it's not going to somehow increase productivity, reduce expenses, or increase sales or revenue, odds are pretty good that the CEOs, the CFOs, COOs are going to go, well, I don't know about this. How much will it cost up front? It's all about money. And I don't want to seem, totally crass of saying, okay, the C-suite only cares about money. But let's face it, even in a nonprofit, this is what we're in business for. We're in business to achieve a goal, which is often connected, which is always, not often, always connected to the bottom line. And if we can't achieve that goal, we can't just keep throwing money at what employees want. We'll need to make sure that it's connected to the bottom line, to reducing costs, improving productivity, increasing sales, whatever it might be. The other thing that they're going to want to know is how much is this going to increase or decrease, and when will we see the difference? And that's a hard one. A lot of these things with, touchy-feely things in HR, they're hard to identify, but they're not impossible. But be realistic. If it's going to take a year, then you need to say it's going to take a year and not sell them a bag of goods, because they're going to know, this C-suite's going to say, hey, you told us it's going to take 6 months and it's taken 9 months or 12 months. And they're going to question your judgment and your metrics. And then they're not going to allow you at that table. So make sure that you are very clear and that you know these questions and at least an attempt to know the answers. Here is just an example of metrics. What reports do you use to measure the impact of your HR initiative? So this is, usually something that HR has somewhat control over. I just happen to highlight two, but I'll read them real quickly. Employee performance, overall employee turnover, employee satisfaction, new hire turnover, demographics, employee engagement, additions and terminations, employee absence, headcount, and training spent per employee. So I just randomly highlighted number 3 and 4 for employee satisfaction and new hire turnover. I already mentioned to make sure that you're aware that employee satisfaction doesn't necessarily mean employee engagement. So employee satisfaction may not affect anything else on here. You can have a very happy, very satisfied employee that is very low performer, costing you a ton, and is actually causing absences of other people. So be careful with employee satisfaction. I do want your employees to be satisfied, but I want them to be engaged and performing and show up for the job and not annoying your other employees as a priority. And then the second one that I highlighted was new hire turnover. This could be something that you, HR, not even the manager, can specifically affect and increase. New hire turnover is usually because they had a poor onboarding experience. And I don't just mean HR onboarding. I mean everything from the time they got that phone call that they were getting an interview or an email to their first day of work. Okay, how did that experience go? Was it positive? Did I feel like this was a great culture? Did I know exactly what to expect at my interview? Did I bring what I was supposed to? Did I do any assessments that I was told to? Or were there surprises? Did I know there was going to be a drug test? Or did I not know that and now I have to take myself out of the running after going through this process for a month? So new hire turnover is very, very important. The more information you give people up front before they're even your employees, the longer they're going to stay with your organization or choose not to come with your organization, to be quite honest. So new hire turnover is very important. Now, this could also be connected to the managers. As I mentioned before, 58% of managers are just set free. Hey, welcome to management. You're going to get no training. And so that could also affect new hire turnover. So that could be something that HR can affect. Not that it's your responsibility to train managers how to do their job, but it is your responsibility to help guide the manager's manager to train them. Again, putting training on a schedule and then measuring it. This is another list, similar list, of what reports or data do you wish you had to measure the impact of your HR initiatives. And so you can see it's almost the same data, but it's just in a different order. The first, I'm going to go back to the last screen. The first one here is what do you use, and is employee performance, turnover, satisfaction, and then new hire turnover. And then here, which ones do you wish you had? Employee satisfaction, employee turnover, demographics, and employee performance. For small organizations or organizations without a savvy HRI system, HR information system that is, you may not have all the demographics of employees. You might have them on an I-9 or an EEOC form, but it's literally on a piece of paper, and therefore you can't run a report on how many people over 40 you have, or how many how many females you have, or how many people you have of X, genetics, whatever it might be. You want to know that information. You want to make sure that your demographics of your organization represents the community that you're in, the community that you're selling to, and the community that you're physically located in. And then you could also see with that, okay, who do I need to concentrate on? What area do I need to concentrate on? It might be military vets, and now you'll know that I need to go use some military vet hiring services or sources. I highlighted here overall employee turnover. You have to be careful with this one. All of the ones that I highlighted are on turnover. You have to be careful with overall employee turnover. You could have had like one group of employees that all got hired at the same time, and they all retired at the same time. So that's going to affect your turnover. But it's specifically be coded as retirement. And then that way you'll know these people weren't fired and they didn't quit. Again, new hire turnover should be a huge item that you're looking at. I'm not happy at all that they asked HR people this question and it made it to the end of the list. Maybe it's because you already know what these are. And again, employee satisfaction, just be careful with that, because it's not just about employees being satisfied. It's about them being engaged. Where are we going? And I'm headed there with you. The fourth section of this training today is about reviewing the basics of using HR metrics in assessing human capital related risks. I do this session in a 90-minute version, so I'm squishing it all in for the conference. But we would go into this in much more detail. So what you want to look at, these 4 samples are diversity, safety, training, return on investment, which we talked about a little bit, and possibly headcount. Diversity. what is that going to do? What's my risk there? I think we all know the answer to that, and it's shown on the screen here. Is this discrimination? Discrimination complaints, unintentional discrimination. You could have employee referral programs, for example. Well, most employees, they are going to refer people that look like them, that are from their neighborhood. And so if you have all, white males, you may have many white males being referred, which means your diversity, your EEOC rates are going to be reduced. And so, we think this is a great idea. Let's hire everybody's friends, but sometimes you could be getting yourself in hot water. This might not matter for many companies, but if you have government contracts, this definitely does matter. If you have any kind of government funding, there's usually some kind of diversity, anti-discrimination clauses in there that you need to report to make sure that you are going above and beyond the local laws and complying with government contractor laws. But let's face it, take away the laws. We should be doing this anyways, right? We should be making sure that we have a diverse workforce, and not just diversity of look, but diversity of thought as well, so that you can get many people's ideas and you can continue to grow as an organization. The next item that I have listed here is safety. Why do we care about safety? Because it's expensive, that's why. Besides the fact that it's a legal requirement, it is very expensive. If you have a lot of accidents or injuries on the job site, your workers' comp claims are going to go way up. Your rates are going to go way up for a very long time. And your workers' comp insurance, they may even drop you. That happens a lot. And then if one drops you, you may not be able to get covered by someone else. In certain industries, you may end up having to go into even a PEO to get covered. So safety is very important. So again, let's put away the law. Okay, you should care about your employees. End of story. Safety risks are everywhere. Somebody can trip and fall, and you did everything you possibly could do to avoid that from happening. Just make sure you avoid it from happening again, and you don't treat the person like they were a criminal because they tripped and fell. Now, you're always going to have people that are taking advantage of the system. But if you're running these reports and you're saying, hey, on the night shift, we have a lot of safety claims, then that's where you're going to be able to need to address the managers on the night shift and making sure that there's proper lighting, things like that, and that there's training not only to the manager, but to the employees to make sure that we avoid all kinds of safety issues. The next sample is training return on investment. So this is so important. So many people throw training at everything. Oh, we'll solve this problem. Let's throw training on it. But then we have a training program that nobody understands why they're there, but they're mandated to be there. They're bored, they're half asleep, they're not taking notes. They have no clue what's even going on, but they're there because they were told to be there. And guess what? They're paid to be there, which is taking money away from your productivity. I recommend for training, make sure you get the right training. You don't need an 8-hour course when it can be done in 2 hours, but sometimes you can't do a 2-hour course, you need the full 8. Depends on your industry. Make sure that you're doing some kind of pre-assessment. So even with the individual taking it, you can do like a quiz before the training and then a quiz after the training to see if their answers have changed based on the training that they have received. If they did not and they should have, then the training is the wrong training and you need to scratch that and find another type of training. And then, another metric that we could use for human capital related risk is just headcount. Why headcount? Well, many laws are based on how many employees you have in specific locations. I have here the ACA, so if you have X amount of employees, 50 or more, depending on how long they've been there, things like that. We won't get into that in detail. You have to have some kind of health care plan. You have magical numbers based off 100 employees. There's usually EEOC forms. You also have magical numbers based off for FMLA and then even state FMLA too. So many states have their own FMLA. So headcount is a big issue. And not to say you want to avoid these laws, but if you're not prepared financially to implement healthcare for another year and a half, then you need to monitor your head count and make sure that you're below 50 and the average of 50. And so you can't grow more than that until you're ready to have that budget hit. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But you need to be monitoring that all the time. And number 5, let's learn how HR metrics improve strategic and operational decision making. This is the best part here. This is where it really, really comes in. You're like, yep, put me at the table. I want to actually care about this. So I'm going to give you 2 examples just for the lack of time. A hiring report. You don't need a fancy system to do this. It would be awesome if you did have a fancy system. You had the accounting system and an HR system and they all went together. But you don't need that. You could literally just pull together an Excel sheet. Now you're going to have to refresh it all the time and add new information, which is going to be a little bit of a pain. But even if you had a fancy accounting system or HRIS system, you still have to put that data in. So data in is data out. The data's got to go in one way or the other. Somebody's got to put it in there. So let's pretend we're running a hiring report and we want to know the cost per hire. Every single penny put towards hiring a new employee needs to be on this report. So the cost of posting the job ad, say you use Indeed and you spent $50. So you have to throw that $50 in there. The cost of training the new hire, the cost of training the manager how to do interviewing for that position. Materials, or any materials that are necessary for maybe you do assessments during the interviews, either online or even during the actual interviews. Time spent screening candidates. So all of whoever's doing recruiting, whether it's HR or maybe an administrative person from the technical department, they need to have all that time coded towards hiring of that specific role. So there needs to be some kind of maybe job code. And then the conducting of the interviews. The last 2 that I just mentioned is where I find most of the time is spent. And because it's part of labor, a lot of people just dismiss it like, oh, well, that's just part of doing work. Well, if you can spend 10 hours interviewing people, screening candidates / interviewing people, or 40 hours, which one would you rather do? I think you would rather spend the 10 hours. Maybe you really, really like interviewing people and you want to do the 40, but your CFO is probably going to want you to do the 10. So this is where it helps to put into, say, you're trying to get a HRIS system or a candidate portal so everything can be done electronically and that most of the work goes onto the candidate who you don't have to pay because they're not your employee. If you're trying to get that system, this is where you can sell it to your CFO, CHRO, whoever it is, to say, I can reduce time to hire from 40 hours to 10 hours or whatever it might be, thereby reducing the manager's, part of the manager's pay from going there, part of this administrative assistant's pay, part of my pay. Oh, look at that. I've just saved the company $10,000 per candidate times 5 candidates. I just saved the company $50,000, and this system that I want to buy over here is only $10,000. That is a true, that's not even related necessarily to the hiring report, but that is where you can do the benefits analysis of the whole system put together. This is very important to track anything that you want to do in the organization, but the hiring report specifically is important to track the comparison. Say, well, my friend at another company, and we get everything in online, as you know. I even gave you some resources to look at. You can say, okay, in my industry, it should only take 10 hours to hire this person. Why is it taking us 40? And you have to really honestly figure out, is it me? Is it my manager? Is it the position? Is my pay too low? And start, dialing into what can I change on this that seems to be going awry. And then here is another example related to turnover. This is a big one that most HR people, really want to dive into, especially when there's voluntary turnover. But honestly, even when there's not voluntary, when your managers keep firing people. So these are employee engagement related reports. So not engagement reports, but related. Absenteeism and turnover. Unless you have something like a worldwide pandemic, such as COVID-19, your absenteeism should be pretty low. People who are engaged at work, they want to be at work. People who are not engaged and don't want to be there, they hate being there, they don't want to deal with their manager, they don't want to deal with their coworkers, they're going to take advantage of the PTO, the sick, vacation, whatever you might have as much as possible. So we need to start tracking these. You could usually track this in your timekeeping system. So whatever you're using for timekeeping, even if it's a piece of paper, and then put it into an Excel report. Preferably it would be in a big, lovely HRIS system or accounting system. But if not, you can always turn to Excel and track, okay, why is this person always absent? Anybody else in the similar role always absent? Anybody else in the similar department or with the same manager? All the way down to location, and then you can just keep going. And then the other top employee engagement related report is turnover. Absenteeism, often relates to turnover. A lot of people will call out until they're fired so that they can possibly collect unemployment. So we won't talk about that, the unemployment part, but many people will get it, especially if you're not fighting it. So turnover, if your organization's turnover could be related to employee engagement. They're not thrilled being there. They're not satisfied, but they're really not engaged. They don't know what's going on. They just do what they're told. As an adult, we do what we're told occasionally, but generally speaking, we really want to know what's going on and what's my purpose in this company. If you notice unexpected spikes in turnover, something is wrong and we need to figure out what it is. And so you need to be looking at this all the time, especially for bigger companies. For small companies, you're going to know already, but it's interesting when you put things on paper and show it to an executive that it suddenly goes, oh wow, this is real. It wasn't just what I thought in my head. So how to get started with employee metrics. So you may be sitting here thinking, Wendy, I don't have an HRIS system. I have paperwork everywhere and literally paper. How do I get started? So just keep it simple. Don't go crazy. If you just Google HR metrics, oh my goodness, there's so many of them. And the one thing I could say is that some of them lead you to wrong decisions because we have this things called human beings. And, it's almost like the 80-20 rule with human beings. Take the metrics at 80% of what they're worth and then add in everything else, but make sure you're keeping it simple. So let's do a recruitment HR metrics. You can do demographics and see if there's any changes. Okay, the past year we've only hired people of this age. We want to hire other ages. Why? Because this age is closer to retirement and we're not going to have anybody there in 10 years or whatever it might be, an education level, length of service. How about acceptance rate? We give out 20 offers a week and we only get 2 people to accept. Why is that? Ask some of the people that turned you down. Why did you turn me down? Pay was too low. Letter was written unprofessionally. I have no clue when I was going to start. There was no benefits. They'll tell you, especially the ones that aren't coming to work for you. They'll totally tell you. And make sure that if you are asking people that are working for you, that you're open to hearing the feedback. Other types of metrics that you can use are the opposite end, which is engagement and retention. So why are people quitting? Is there the voluntary turnover rate? So making sure that if you do have an HRIS system or if you're using a payroll system, that you can have codes in there for when someone exits of the reason why. Don't get too complicated because then these reports get crazy. But you could have voluntary, involuntary, retirement, whatever, unfortunately, death, something like that. But you can definitely have things in there so then you can rule out reasons. But if the more reasons you put in there, it gets a lot more difficult to read and, assess. So make sure that you keep it as simple as possible. Another one is retention rate per manager. So again, you can narrow it all the way down to who the manager is. Be careful not to immediately blame the manager because the manager may have been promoted without ever have any training. Time tracking. This is probably one of the most popular ones that we do have, because everybody has payroll. You may not have HR, but you have payroll. So what about the absent rate per manager? So again, going back to the manager or the department or the location, whatever you want to do by. You can do by all of those, by the way. But you can say, okay, why is this particular team have more absences than another? And it could just be that that's a really, really stressful job. Overtime hours. My biggest thing with overtime hours is I'm fine with giving people overtime hours, but are they necessary? Can we cut costs by doing training and bumping up their pay, but reducing overtime hours? The budget itself might end up being the same, but you'd have more engaged, more satisfied employees. You'd be able to budget more effectively if they're more productive within 40 hours versus it takes 45 hours this week, 48, 38, and then you're not going to be able to plan effectively. So many people want overtime to make more money, but you can still give them a bump in pay if they're more productive. Employee value and performance. So here's the little star system that if anybody knows me, I'm not a big fan of performance reviews. And the reason I don't like performance reviews is because they're too late. They're once a year, even once a quarter is too late. You should be talking to your employees all the darn time. So some of the things that you can do, though, to measure employee value and performance is revenue per employee. So the total amount of revenue divided by the total number of employees. This isn't exactly fair because some employees have absolutely nothing to do to affect revenue or sales, I should say. But in the end, they affect revenue because you got to pay them, and therefore, there's definitely revenue that could be affected. Employee performance. Again, I don't care what system that you use, but just make sure that it's fair and consistent. And then if you ever unfortunately do have to do an involuntary termination or reduction in force, and you wanted to use it based off of their reviews, that you would say, yep, I feel really good about that these reviews were accurate, and I'm going to pull the reports because everything's in my HRIS system, which I'm kind of laughing at that, and making sure that you're comparing it using the SMART goals. And so this would be ideal. This slide, I hope you get to these. I don't see it very often, though. When I talk to companies about employee performance, they're like, yeah, we have a good employee performance system. I said, okay, we're going to run a report and let 3 people go. And they're like, no, don't use that. So it's interesting what people think is valid and not valid when you actually have to use it. And then company performance. Are you doing good? Are you doing bad? Is there, a turn in the economy that now you need to make a decision, even though you have all rock star employees? But these are, really, really good information to be using moving forward for the long term. Additionally, we have training and development metrics that you can use, training expenses per employee. Unfortunately, when there are budget cuts in the organization, one of the first things that goes is training, and one of the first things that should stay is training, because if you train employees to do their job more efficiently, not necessarily faster, but better, then you won't have them leave, and you won't have turnover, and you won't have as many mistakes. But training, because it's not tracked accurately, and it's not connected to revenue, and it's not connected to sales, and it's not connected to turnover, and it's not connected to retention, because of all those items I just said, is why training gets kicked out. And so you really do need to start measuring the training expenses, training ratios, the completion rates, and then pulling all these fancy reports that you have together that you will have someday to say, okay, John Doe went through this training. His production rate before was at 60%. After the training, which cost this, his production rate went up to 90%. Therefore, the retraining return on investment was valid. This is where you can get accountants, CFOs, anybody that's really good with data and numbers to help you with this. And I do have to say also that Excel has amazing resources and reports in there. You just need to get somebody that knows how to use Excel. They have a lot of metrics and calculations that are already built into Excel. You just need to know where they are and then dump the data in, and they do the reports for you. They may not look pretty, but you can get them to look really pretty. But again, all of these are connected together. You have to make sure that the data, I see a typo there. You need to make sure the data is accurate. I mentioned this before. I've been in the middle of this too, that I'm like, I run a report and I'm like, this doesn't look right. It just doesn't look right. And then when I dive into the system, whether it's an Excel data sheet, whether it's an HRIS system, and I dive in behind the scenes, I find that start dates were wrong, or ages were wrong, or there's, one little decimal point off, and it skews everything. And so it's so important to make sure that the data is accurate. Otherwise, all of this is a complete waste. You're going to look like a fool when you're presenting to somebody, and depending on who they are, they may not forgive you for that. I know it's not right, but it happens. Once you make sure that the data is accurate, analyze it and draw conclusions from it. Again, remember, in my opinion, this is not scientific, but the 80-20 rule, that 80% of the data that you're going to report on, there's 20% of that information you may need to put in there, little caveats. Oh yeah, somebody's on maternity leave. Oh yeah, somebody's got COVID. Oh yeah, there was an accident at work, and that's why that person is absent. And so, you have to make sure that you put in all these human resource factors when you're presenting. So you have might have a report with a lot of the little stars at the end of it. ID the right audience for each report. So if you have 50 HR metric reports, you better not be giving them all to your boss. Some of them are for the manager. Some of them are for HR only. Some of them are for the CFO. Some of them are for maybe the CEO. And so make sure you have the right audience. Make sure your report aligns with your organizational goals. If your organization's goal is to, be the highest performing, then that's what the metrics need to be measuring and showing. If your organization only wants your employees to be satisfied and engaged, then those are the type of metrics that you need. And then the fifth point here is on this slide is to get rid of reports that do not help make better informed decisions. If you're just running reports because they're really cool but they don't mean anything, just get rid of them. You could look at them maybe over coffee or a glass of wine, but don't show them to anybody else. Otherwise, they're just going to be in data overload. We barely have time to do our current jobs now, never mind read reports from the Human Resources Department. So to really sum this up, HR is all about people strategy. What's working well. This is what you're going to find out with the HR metrics. An employee satisfaction report is awesome. Everybody's happy. And then the managers and directors turn around and say, yeah, they're happy, but they're not performing. They're not showing up to work. Their productivity's down, losses up, expenses are up, turnover's up. Okay, what needs improvement? All those things that I just mentioned. So really, again, aligning all of this people strategy, the human resources of your organization, and the metrics used to identify how those human resources are working in order to identify what needs improvement, and then dump money. Time is money, so it's not just money, but time is money, dumping money into improving them. Once you get to the point where you're like, okay, every Friday I'm running this metric, then you can start seeing trends, and then you could track trends and start really saying, okay, we changed this in recruitment, and therefore it changed this over here in engagement. We changed this in training, or we added this in training, and it affected productivity and loss over here. What else can we do for the future? There might also be cyclical trends. Maybe you're an organization that during certain holiday seasons or summer, performance goes up or performance goes down. Well, if that's the case, that's when you need to be forecasting for, say, next summer. Okay, we need less staff next summer. Let's make sure that is when we grant people vacation or something like that. or maybe we don't bring in interns at that time. We bring them in during the fall. So what trends to expect in the future? That's how you're really going to be an effective business partner at the executive table. Lean on HR metrics to make decisions, just like we do with financial statements. We make sure that the financial statements are accurate. If an accountant gives a CFO a financial statement with wrong data, trust me, they're going to know about it. And you're going to know the same thing. They may not get used to it right away because it's a brand new report. And many people, especially executives, it depends on their personality and where they come from, what their background is, but they're going to want to see the data behind the reports. And so be prepared to provide that information too. And unfortunately, some of it will be confidential, so you're going to have to black it out. All right, I know we covered a lot today. I could talk about this for hours. I wish I had more time to show you all these reports. I encourage you to download this PDF and go back to the links of the articles that I got this information from and just Google HR metrics because there's a lot out there. It's overwhelming. It's incredibly overwhelming, but start with something small that you can affect. Maybe it's recruiting, maybe it's turnover, but you'll see in the end that they're all mashed together. You know, recruiting affects turnover, engagement affects turnover, turnover affects recruiting because the word gets out there if you're a good or bad company. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to connect with me on social media. I respond most quickly to the LinkedIn requests and the messages. Again, I'm realistic, honest, and reliable. I'm there for you if you need anything. And this is my friend's baby over here reading my book. He is learning early not to be part of the leadership problem. Thank you for having me. Take care. Be safe.